I guess three main points for me. The ends, what we're trying to achieve, the means, how we get there, and the distractions, all the nonsense that's being produced to take us off the path. My starting point, having worked in tobacco control and taken interest in it over many years, is that the priorities now need to be rethought. The correlation between tobacco control activity and actual outcomes on tobacco, reductions in smoking, the smoking prevalence, very, very poor, actually, very poor. And that movement hasn't really subjected itself to proper empirical testing. On the other hand, with harm reduction measures, case studies would be Sweden and Norway, where smokeless tobacco has been widely introduced. There's been a huge reduction in smoking. The lowest rates of smoking in Europe by far are found in Sweden, 13% compared to 28% on average. Similar in Norway. And with it, very low rates of smoking-related disease. We have proof of concept. Okay, now, in terms of what this directive in the EU will do, we've got the Commission saying that all the measures in it, so warning labels, bans on flavourings and menthol, 10 limits to packs of 10, bans on rounded corners, all sorts of stuff, will bring about a 2% reduction in consumption, basically, which is less than 1% equivalent reduction in prevalence. It's in the noise. It's in the noise. Okay. At the same time, we've got analysts, stock analysts, saying that we would expect around 50%, or around, we'd expect the volume of e-cigarettes to overtake the volume of cigarette sales in the United States within 10 years. Okay, we're talking about something far, far larger. Yeah, the public health lobby talks about this as if it's a sort of ancillary annoyance that they have to put up with, and then throws up a lot of black propaganda about it to try and make sure it doesn't happen. And I'm glad Martin acknowledged this, because he'd been forced to face it. There's been much of the problem about disinformation comes from the public health lobby. Okay, so I think we should, when we're talking to European and British politicians, we should have our eye on the big prize, and the big prize is harm reduction through e-cigarettes and through smokeless tobacco if it wasn't banned. Now, the means. I enjoyed Martin's reflection on the way markets work and how they work to favour big companies. That, as you all know, was a piece of complete nonsense. What really favours big companies is very high regulatory barriers to entry. Very large investments required to enter or stay in the market, very complex technical regulations, high investments in automation, in process control, in personnel that are qualified to understand technical regulations. And it's that is driving, or would drive, if we had medicines regulation, would drive the e-cigarette industry back to a tobacco industry dominated oligopoly, which is where it will head directly towards if they get their way. Okay, it's also not a very good way of producing good products, quote, good products, i.e. a good product is, in harm reduction terms, one that people want to use. Okay, now the crowdsourcing effects of the demand that you get in markets are a better way of getting to that than a regulator determining that a certain dose of nicotine administered in a certain way is the right product for the market. Okay, now you can see this with medicines regulation. Medicines regulation already applies, as Martin says, to harm reduction indications for NRT, but nobody likes them, virtually no one uses them, and they've been a dismal failure. So if that's what success looks like, I would rather not have medicines regulation involved in promoting the movement towards e-cigarettes. Okay, there is a perfectly sensible alternative. There is a lot of consumer protection regulation that already applies. That can move from general to specific if necessary. It's perfectly possible to set standards for e-liquids, for devices, to have CE warnings and so on. There's a perfectly serviceable regulatory framework out there waiting to be used that has been ignored, it's not been consulted on, it's not been considered, the options have not been properly appraised, yet it would be far superior to what's proposed instead. And then finally, if I may, distractions. Others have mentioned these, I won't dwell on them. The first is the gateway effect. Please, please, please don't be caught out by this. A little history, the product snus was banned across Europe because of a gateway effect argument. It was wrong then, it's obviously wrong now. Snus has been an incredible gateway out of smoking, both for adults and for young people. The evidence is beyond dispute about that in both Sweden and Norway, yet none of the health campaigners who push for this have been willing to engage with the evidence and reverse their position. Okay? So these arguments are put forward as distractions. They're there because there's an underlying puritanical ideological dislike of these things, and these are proxy arguments that can be thrown up as kind of flap. The next one is renormalisation. Utter cobblers. It's normalising e-cigarettes. It's not renormalising tobacco. If you can't tell the difference between an e-cigarette and a tobacco, you should be in a playgroup and nowhere near a restaurant or a public place. It's completely preposterous. The next thing is dual use. Dual use is a good thing. Okay, it's people cutting down on smoking and often on a journey towards stopping smoking altogether. By the way, I disagree with you about zero nicotine being the goal. It's not the ideal. I remember discussing this with, many of you will know Anne McNeil, Professor Anne McNeil. She said exactly the same as you. The ideal would be to get to nicotine free. Of course, we were discussing this over dinner with a nice glass of red wine in front of us. And I said, well, is zero alcohol the ideal? At that particular moment, it wasn't, and I'm afraid she had to concede that. And I think if you accept that there are benefits associated with the drug nicotine and no harms, then you have to say that it's rational for people to want to use the drug because it gives them benefits. There's another. I think I'll leave the distraction. I think behind this, I just want to say there's a lot of things that are thrown up as distracting flack that mask an underlying dislike or disgust or distaste for these things. That is actually not their business, but they're using these other sort of population arguments to try to get a more restrictive environment. It's completely inappropriate, completely unethical, completely wrong. Thanks.